On July 1st, 1937, the night before her fateful last flight, Amelia Earhart stood at the seaside in Papua New Guinea looking out over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. In her heroic attempt to fly around the world, she had already covered 22,000 miles and had 7,000 left to go. The mighty Pacific was to be her last great hurdle. Hoping to make it back home to California in time to celebrate the 4th of July, Amelia contemplated what lay ahead of her. Later that same evening, she said the following: "Not much more than a month ago, I was on the other shore of the Pacific, looking westward. This evening, I looked eastward over the Pacific. In those fast-moving days which have intervened, the whole width of the world has passed behind us, except this broad ocean. I shall be glad when we have the hazards of its navigation behind us." The next morning, Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, boarded their Lockheed Electra aircraft and departed from the city of Lae, Papua New Guinea. They were never seen again. The hazards of navigation over the Pacific had indeed claimed their lives. Ironically, unbeknownst to most people in the world, at the same time that year, there were some other heroic flyers preparing for a marathon flight of their own out over the Pacific Ocean. They would be departing, though, from Alaska, just about a month after Amelia Earhart, heading southwest. Ultimately, they would arrive in the Hawaiian Islands, the very place which was supposed to be the second stop for Amelia Earhart as she crossed the Pacific heading northeast. But these flyers made the trip successfully and continue to repeat it every year. These phenomenal flyers are known as Pacific golden plovers, or the kolea birds of Hawaii. These birds migrate once every year, 6,000 miles round trip between Hawaii, where they live most of the year, and the Alaskan tundra, where they go for just a few months during the summertime to nest and have their young. These little birds, about a foot tall, make the journey once a year. The kolea will flap their wings an estimated 500,000 times during their flight. That obviously takes a certain amount of energy, and as it turns out, just like airplanes, the kolea carry only enough fuel in the way of body fat to get from Alaska to Hawaii. We begin to see the unmistakable signs of God's hand at work in providing for the kolea birds. The kolea obviously don't think in a critical sense about how many calories they need to consume before taking off on their marathon flight, as for instance a modern runner might do in preparation for an upcoming race. Nevertheless, these birds, before they leave Alaska, are as well prepared for their long flight home as any runner could ever hope to be in a race. It's interesting that in preparation for this flight, God has programmed a kind of unusual behavior into these birds. In order to fuel up for the trip, the kolea actually begin to eat heavily several weeks prior to takeoff. During midsummer, up in the tundra, there are nearly 24 hours per day of sunlight. At that time of year, and only at that time of year, there's an explosion of insect life, and the kolea feast on the abundance of insects. They put on as much as 70% additional body weight in the form of fat, which they will burn up to produce the energy needed to make the trip. The kolea's genetic programming also causes their wing muscles to increase in size just prior to their flight. God's provision has placed the kolea in a particular environment to meet all their needs. You've probably heard the saying, where God guides, God provides. It's certainly true in the case of the kolea. Consider the flight. From Alaska to Hawaii is almost 3,000 miles and is done over the open ocean. Flying at 50 to 60 miles per hour, it's still going to take them 2.5 days to get there, so there might be any number of things that could throw them off course. Crosswinds, storms, navigating in the black of night. Yet these birds find their way over the featureless ocean for this vast distance unerringly back, not to just the general area of Hawaii, but to the very same spot they departed from before leaving for Alaska. The kolea migrate to Alaska to nest and have their babies, so that's where they begin life. Although unlike most birds, the kolea are never fed by their parents. Within hours of birth, they are kicked out of the nest to forage in the tundra for food on their own. This is all part of God's plan for these little birds. Jesus said that not one sparrow is forgotten before God, and neither are the colea. The parent birds guard them and warn of approaching dangers, but they won't feed them. God, however, has given these little birds the instinct and ability to leave the nest and fend for themselves right from the start. The colea are a wonderful illustration that the existence of God is plain to see in the things he has made. Now, in early August, the parent birds return to Hawaii, leaving the young colea chicks behind in Alaska. About a month after the parent birds have left, a deep-rooted instinctual drive stirs up within these young birds, who gather together, take off, and head straight for Hawaii. Who told them to do this, or shows them the way? They literally don't even know yet that the Hawaiian Islands exist, and yet they mount up on their young wings and head southwest to the unknown horizon over the sea. In what can only be described as an outright miracle, even though they've never been there before, even though they have no guide to show them the way, God literally calls these young birds through a mysterious instinct to fly out for the first time into the unknown over the vast Pacific Ocean for thousands of miles to those beautiful homes that he has waiting for them. In a similar way, as children of God, we have yet to see the beautiful homes that God has prepared for us. The Bible tells us that the eye has not seen, the ear has not heard, and neither has it entered into our hearts the things, the wonderful things, that God has prepared for those who love him and who are called according to his purposes. God has a plan and purpose for each and every one of us, and he is calling out to you and me, even now, to walk in the ways that he has prepared for us, even as he calls these little birds to fly away along a course prepared for them, to a place that they've never ever dreamed of. Perhaps the thought of these little birds persevering through the obvious hardships of such a long and arduous flight can inspire us to continue to fight the good fight, to persevere until one day when we too will reach our heavenly home.